Thank you for tuning in to the Into the Classroom series produced by Mental Health California, sponsored by Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative. Welcome to another episode of Into the Classroom, which is a student mental health awareness multimedia series produced by Mental Health California. I'm your host, Conrad Crump, affectionately known as Coach Crump. And for today's topic, we're going to be talking about youth substance use prevention. So we'd like to discuss the impact that substance use can have on youth development, the role of schools in prevention efforts, and the importance of community support. We'll also unlock prevention methods that have proven to be effective, and will shed light on the challenges faced in tackling this mounting issue. So feel free to join us as we work towards a safer and healthier future for our youth, including promoting strategies and initiatives aimed at educating and empowering young people to make healthy, drug-free choices. Our clinician today is my dear friend, the fabulous Mr. Christian Jacobs. Christian is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a leading Brother Be Well clinical advisor. Christian is a noted therapist who also has expertise in substance use prevention, so we're definitely in for an informative treat today. His depth of knowledge benefits youth and their families throughout California. Christian, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you doing, Coach Crump?
I'm doing fantastic. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Wonderful. And for our guests today, our young folks that we have on the call, we have with us Joel Suazo from Los Angeles City College. What's up, Joel? How you doing, bro?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
Good. And we also have with us Mr. Keyshawn Williams. Greetings, Keyshawn. How you doing?
Yo, Coach. Good to see you.
You too. And I hear you're also a recent graduate of Sac State University, so congratulations on your achievement as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And I also see that we have with us Monica Tamayo from UCLA.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hey, welcome, Monica. Good to see you again. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of this topic, I'm wondering if our licensed clinician, Christian, can give us some brief clinical insights into youth substance use, maybe some of the reasons behind it, the types of drugs that are used, and some of the consequences of substance use. Christian?
Yeah, so it's interesting you asked that question because substance use is a little different for youth than it is for adults. And when I say youth, I always consider anyone's brain who's still developing, so between up to the age of 23 to 25. But substance use disorder is really a condition when we're talking about kids, right? Or teenagers they use drugs in unhealthy ways. So that can be any type of the drugs we know, right? So alcohol or marijuana, any stimulants such as methamphetamine or cocaine, or any depressants, like Xanax or lean, any of those, or opiates. Those are all depressants. And even though they're some of them are legal, such as opiates, that doesn't mean that you can't create an addiction to it. So that's the other part about it. The information that just because it's legal doesn't mean that you can't, or just because legal and your doctor prescribes it doesn't mean it's not addictive or you can't get addicted to it. So so that's just a general overview of what it is, and basically you're looking at any time where that substance use is changing your pattern of life on a daily basis. Even tobacco as well. And some people see caffeine sometimes as a drug because because the addiction and the withdrawal symptoms that you have when you don't drink coffee after a while. Um, so I just want to keep those things in mind. When you're thinking what are the substances and how it affects you, how it affects the youth mind versus a matured adult brain. So those are a few areas and how of what they are. And when you're looking at that early stages of that point of addiction, it can come from any of those substances, whether it's legal or illegal.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight, Christian. And, I'd actually like to ask everyone on the call, just by a show of hands, if you yourself have been affected by, exposed to, or even perhaps engaged in substance use. All right. Well, I see everyone's hands have raised. So I want to tell you that you're not alone. And I know that I'm not alone either. And there's a reason for that. But let's go ahead and get into our slide presentation. And we'll go ahead and look to gain critical knowledge for thriving in today's world when we're talking about youth substance use and prevention. So let's go ahead and go into our next slide. So as we know, youth substance use can have severe consequences in physical and mental well-being of our students, and it can also hinder their academic performance and overall development. These impacts can both be short-term as well as long-term, and they can range from impaired judgment, risky behaviors, which can lead to accidents and injuries, and they can even include addiction, mental health disorders, as well as a host of other problems. Going on to our next slide. And according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, 60% of college students are engaged in binge drinking, and 20% have used illicit drugs in the past month. And this is particularly important given that young people's brains are still in their developmental stage, something that Christian just mentioned earlier, as well as being, susceptible to peer influence. That's something that's a really big deal, and we want to get more information on some of that as well. So let's go into our next slide. Now, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, in year 2020, 35% of students reported using alcohol, 21% reported using marijuana, and 3% reported using drugs other than marijuana. Let's go ahead and go into our next slide. Now, when it comes to ethnicity and substance use, the CDC has stated that Native American and Alaska Native youth have the highest rates of substance use, followed by white, Latinx or Hispanic, then African American, and then Asian American youth. So it is clear that these disparities indicate a true need for culturally sensitive prevention efforts to address specific needs for each specific community. So when we talk about some of these factors that contribute, to youth substance, and we can go on to the next slide. When we talk about these factors, we understand that mental health definitely plays a significant role. So I'd like to ask you, Christian, if you can talk to us about how mental health plays a role in substance use amongst young people.
Well, the number one way it plays a role is when you're looking at addiction, because what happens is once a person becomes addicted to a substance. First, let me go back. There's a difference between being dependent and and there being an addiction. There's two different definitions. Just picture dependency as like a more milder version of addiction, where it may change a few things in your life, but not significant. An addiction is when basically you can't go without it. So your body may crave it. You may have withdrawals, things of that sort. So I wanted to make that distinguish between those two, because there's a dependence where you like it, but you kind of rely on it, but you can quit if you wanted to. Then there's an addiction component where you have to have it. Your whole life is dependent around it. You're looking for it. You're thinking about when it's coming the next. So those are connections between the two, and also want to make the connection between some folks are exposed to alcohol without their consent at an early age, which contributes to addiction. For example, fetal alcohol syndrome that happens in the womb. So if a mother is drinking during pregnancy, that child could, not every time, but that child could develop fetal alcohol syndrome, and basically where that child has a natural aversion or connection to alcohol due to it going, in the womb and in the bloodstream, things of that sort. So when they're born, they may be born with some symptoms, and also there's a lot of physical symptoms too that a child could have as a result. I think it's sometimes their eyes are further apart. They call them dwarf ears, where they have very pointy ears at the end, and some of the face construction may not be symmetrical. So those are some other things to look up in terms of if you want to do some more research in that area.
Well, thank you very much for that, Christian. Let's go ahead and go on into our next slide. So another element that has been identified to show a contribution to substance use among youth are their traumatic experiences, such as physical and emotional abuse, neglect, and even witnessing violence. Substance use has also been shown to serve as a coping mechanism to numb the pain or even escape from some of these circumstances or some of these memories. I'd like to open it up to some of our young folks and just kind of talk to each of you, if you can maybe elaborate on why a young person might resort to using substances. And I'll kick it off to you first, Joel.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. Speaking from my own experience, I've had some trauma experiences in the past where I was, taken away from my family and placed in the foster care system. When I was in a couple of those foster homes or group homes, I seen a lot of youth my age or younger around me using substances. I noticed that the reason why they were using these substances is because of, their past trauma, maybe getting taken away from their family, or maybe learning these negative behaviors from people they were around. It definitely served as something that people were, trying to either numb their pain or forget about the past, and overall just suppress those emotions that they have never spoken about and have been difficult to for. So when I was in those type of predicaments, I was definitely exposed to that. And I did try marijuana. I did smoke marijuana at some point when I was younger in high school. But I learned that, that wasn't really something for me. And it didn't help or value anything in my life. So I stopped doing that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing, Joel, and thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty. Just want to kind of open it up if either you, Keyshawn, or Monica wanted to chime in or reflect on what you've heard or kind of where we've led up to today in the conversation. And I'll go ahead and pick on you, Keyshawn. If you've got any feedback or any thoughts around young folks using substances to cope or to escape.
Yeah, I would add, first of all, I agree with everything that Joel said. It's people having issues with their trauma and trying to find a way to cope with it, but it's in a negative way. I would add on top of that is sometimes it's youth curiosity and experimenting with life. And I would say we could do a better job of educating our youth outside of just saying, hey, this is bad, you shouldn't do that, and telling them exactly how it affects their brains and exactly why they wouldn't want to do that because of the long-term effects of it. And I would say, like I said, most of the people that I would know, a lot of it was just experimentation, and they might not have done it if they had heard about something other than just, hey, don't do that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And Monica, do you have anything that you might want to add to the conversation or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. So I think the reason why the youth might be overdoing like abusing the substances is because of easy access to sometimes. Like I grew up in a
Mhm.
predominantly black and brown community, and it was just popular. Like at every party, there was always alcohol, even if it was a child's party. So it's just easily accessible. The grown-ups are not always paying attention to the substances that are being left around. And kids, teenagers, I know I've had cousins, they just easily swipe it. They may take it to school the next day, and it's just like out of curiosity, like, hey, do you want a sip? Do you want a sip? And it's just like that little curiosity that could lead to an addiction after that.
Wow, no, that's absolutely true. Thank you as well for that, Monica. I heard, utilizing those substances for coping and to escape. I've heard lack of education and awareness and ease of access, which is all very true. Yeah, totally true. Additionally, I would say that the lack of parental supervision, as well as the lack of support, can also increase the likelihood of that experimentation that Keyshawn kind of talked about, that can lead to addiction and some of those dependency problems that Christian kind of alluded to earlier as well. So we can go on to our next slide. Looking at peer pressure, which is another significant factor, right? I mean, the aspect of trying to fit in. Oftentimes young folks seek validation from their peers. They want to be accepted. They want to fit in. They want to be looked at as cool. So this is another element that is a huge piece and a huge component as well, especially with young folks. Being in environments where you've got a lot of young folks, and folks are engaging in certain behaviors and activities, it can be easy for a young person to be swayed because their friends might be doing it too. So let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. So now we've talked a little bit about substances, and we know that alcohol is actually the most widely used substance among youth, given that it's socially accepted and it's relatively easy access. But we'd like to think about some of the other substances that young folks are using. And I'd like to just round robin and ask each of our young folks if you can maybe call out a substance that folks are engaging in today. And I'll start with you, Monica.
What we've been hearing about fentanyl just running around the streets freely, and everyone having more access to it now than they did back then.
Yes, fentanyl is definitely a huge issue. How about you, Keyshawn?
I would say back when I was in high school and the first couple years of college, there was a lot of Xanax running around, and it was making people like zombies and making them make a lot of bad choices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. And what about you, Joel?
I would definitely say like Adderall and marijuana. Those are some of the things that I've seen other youth use either in high school or college. Marijuana is more of a socially accepted substance, and Adderall is something that I guess helps you focus. I've never tried Adderall or anything, so that's just what I've heard. And yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. All of that is great feedback. I appreciate each of you. And as we move on to our next slide, I really appreciate the fact that prescription drugs were brought up because this is yet another substance that has grown in popularity. In addition to the marijuana aspect, because now that marijuana has been decriminalized and is now considered legal in the state. There's a lot of popularity amongst that as well. Let's go ahead and go on into our next slide. So going into that aspect of prescription drugs, drugs like opioids and the problems that they can cause for our young folks today, I'd like to ask Christian, if you can maybe talk to us about what some of those impacts might be to the young developing brain and what they might cause for some of our young folks that might be engaging in those behaviors.
Well, the unfortunate part about all this is that in 2024, we don't have the freedom to experiment with gateway drugs, right? Due to fentanyl, we don't have the luxury to experiment. one drop, this package here. So this is a Splenda package, right? So this, and we all know how much sugar or fake sugar, whatever you want to call it, is in a packet. So if this was fentanyl, this packet will be enough to kill 300 plus people, right? So you have these things here. So imagine a little piece of this, a little tiny granule of that. That gives you an idea of how powerful and potent it is. So with that being said, there's no option to experiment with something that you don't know what's in it, and after one try, it takes you out. So and that's the importance of this here, which is Narcan. And so this Narcan here is it reverses opiate overdose, and I think this is something that's very important that folks will have either in school in their backpacks and access, because those opiates, the way it affects the brain, it basically causes a haywire in your brain. So it causes outbursts and anger issues and unpredictability, a lot of behavioral challenges too. So and it's something you can't control. So once that addiction occurs, it's hard to reverse it. And then you have the withdrawal part, right? So that's another issue. So when someone finally decides to, hey, I'm done with this medication, is prescribed an opiate, that withdrawal process can be painful and long and drawn out, with shakes and, on sleepless nights, things of that sort, crawling skin. So these are all the things that occur, out due to just, taking a medicine as prescribed, something the doctor gave you and told you to take 3 times a day. It only takes 4 days to become addicted to an opiate, 4 to 5 days, depending on the person. So with that being said, these are all the things that are really powerful. This is a really powerful drug. It can really impact the mind and the body.
Right, right. You talk about that, having those impacts to the mind, having those impacts to the body, with regard to fentanyl. And I'm really glad you brought that up, Monica, because that is such a huge issue. And it's just something that's really taking over. And a lot of times you have folks who are being poisoned by fentanyl. Sometimes their drugs may have fentanyl in it, whether it's marijuana or other drugs that they may not know fentanyl is in it. And like you said, it's enough to kill. That Splenda packet is enough to kill, 300 something people. I mean, just a little small granule can also take someone out too. So very, very informative. Thank you very much for that breakdown, Christian. Let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. So when we look at other substances that are stimulants, such as cocaine and methamphetamine, we also know that that's a problem as well. Even though, these substances are used by a smaller percentage of our youth, and this is including hallucinogens as well, which is another type of substance. But, when it comes to those stimulants or hallucinogens, they're used by a smaller population, but it can also be a huge problem. Folks, like Monica said, can have the ease of access of being able to find it in their communities. Folks may not have that education piece on what these drugs may actually do to them, which can really harm them. So these are certainly something that we should definitely take note of. Let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. Now, when it comes to treatment options, it's definitely important to address the underlying factors such as mental health issues and trauma during the recovery process. Some of these options for young folks might include outpatient counseling, residential treatment programs, as well as support groups. So when we talk about some of those resources for youth, I want to kick it back to you, Christian. Can you maybe give us some pointers on what some of those programs might entail, and maybe some resources and options for some of the young folks that might be listening on the call today?
Yeah, a lot of those services are group led. So if someone's interested in, saying, "Hey, I think I have an addiction or a dependency issue, and I want to seek help," a lot of those services are group led because a lot of the research shows that when you put people together who have common, have a common challenge or a common barrier, such as addiction, like I saw Alcohol Anonymous came about. They found out that being in groups and being with someone else is very helpful because, as you know, whenever you're dealing with a mental health issue, depression or anxiety or anything, right? You feel isolated. You feel like you're the only one going through it. It's just you. The world's coming down your shoulders. No one else understands. No one else knows what you're going on, what's going on in your life. So group therapy is one of the key components to treatment. Something else to know is that treatment is also all encompassing. So sometimes it can be your day to day life. So some of the residential facilities means that it's a resident, it's a place you live. So you don't go home at nighttime. You stay in this facility, and they do that because they want to cultivate a healthy lifestyle for you. So when you do go back into the world, you have these healthy habits. Think about how hard it would be to like try and go into treatment, going to AA classes, or you're learning these things, and you're going back home to an area where you learned how to drink from your mom and dad, right? How difficult would that be? So a lot of these places are residential places where you do live there, and they usually go in 90-day increments. So they usually go 30, 60, 90. So it's usually 30 days up to 90 days. And a lot of it is voluntary. You can leave when you want. That's why you hear a lot of celebrities and stuff saying they checked in and they were gone in 2 days, because you can check out whenever you want. And it's not jail. Some folks may think it's like jail. Usually the front door is open. It's voluntary, and it can be costly. So most health coverages do cover it. So if you have Kaiser, you have Medi-Cal, most of those coverages are all inclusive with the service or the type. Or you can pay out of pocket, which can be very expensive. It could be thousands of dollars paying out of pocket, but most coverages do cover that service.
Very good information. Very good. And I want to ask you, Christian, about that 30, 60, 90. I'm curious. I believe I heard you say it takes a certain amount of time for habits to form. Can you maybe talk to us about what that 30, 60, 90 day might mean in terms of impact for a person who's engaging in that and how that might help them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Everyone's different, so it's hard to say. Oh, that it's. I know you hear people say, "Oh, it takes 21 days to form a habit." Not with opioids, not
Yeah.
not with pills. It could be 5 days. Everyone's different, right? You have surgery, and the doctor gives you those pills, and then like in 5 days you use it up, and like on the sixth day you're like after four you're starting to itch. You're like, oh shoot, am I addicted? So everyone's different, but that increment goes based on time frame. So that first 30 days sometimes for folks is just really detoxing, right?
Mhm.
You're not even getting into the meat and potatoes of the classes and learning how to restructure your life and live without the drug. That first 30 days is just sometimes rehabbing and detoxing, getting out of your system.
Yeah.
Those cold nights, those sleepless nights, and those other days, then it goes on, right? So 30, 60, 90, as now you're looking at life skills, and then you're having a sponsor. So it can look different for every person, but just know that the time factor is sometimes based on the individual's treatment process and how addicted they are to a substance.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I know that wasn't something I knew that was something that you would have experience and knowledge in. So I appreciate that, because I know as the time goes on and as a person gets more days under their belt, they get a lot more confident, start feeling a little bit like, hey, I might be on to something. I might be able to do this. So thank you very much for that information as well. Let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. So now let's talk about the role of schools in prevention. Now, let me ask, our young folks here on the call, because I see we have representation from the community college system, representation from the CSU, as well as representation from the UC. And, I'm curious to know, at your schools, are there programs or education that's offered to students about some of these issues, whether it be substance use or mental health or both? And I'll start with you, Monica. If you can maybe talk to us about what you're seeing at your campus.
Yeah, so I remember for orientation, we did have maybe about like a 30-45 minute presentation about substance abuse, because it did show like, you might be exposed to a lot of substances and you don't want to abuse them. So it was showing you like how you could go about them safely, like, knowing your limits, as well as knowing when to stop, or when to say no. It's also shown like the negative aspects, what could happen if you do overdose, how you could get help, where to go. And they always they give you like this phone number that you can reach out to if you feel like you need help getting home. So they're lending out like that support to you, letting you know that they're here to help you. Like, they hope you don't get to that point where you end up like in the hospital or have to go to the doctor or anything, but they do have the support here.
Awesome. And very briefly, I'll just kick it off to Keyshawn. If you could give me a one sentence of what you've seen at your campus, and as well as you, Joel, just a quick one sentence of what you are seeing at your school. And Keyshawn, you can go ahead and go first.
For me, I would say peer counseling. That's really the biggest thing that I saw at Sac State that helped a lot of people. Like Christian said, if you could talk to your peers and if you could be in a peer group, that makes you feel better. So I would recommend that. If your school has peer counseling, I would use that.
Awesome. And thank you. And how about you, Joel?
Yeah, as of right now, I know my school has mental health support. You can either reach out to them. They do have a hotline, and it is also accessible online. So if you don't go to school or go in person to your classes, then you'll be able to access that through their website.
Wonderful. Thank you. And let's go ahead and go to our next slide. So as we've seen, and heard, SAMHSA, which is, the substance abuse, mental health administration, is able to provide you with resources. And there's a phone number that's listed, and definitely something for our young folks who may be on the call, or even folks that are here today, to be able to utilize 1-800-662-HELP. Also that group therapy that was discussed as well, is something that can be beneficial. Let's go ahead and go to our next slide. Also, as we mentioned, peer support programs, community support programs, all of these are going to be beneficial to our young folks, and, ensuring that they have really the best opportunity to get educated on all of this, as well as to get the support that they need. And let's go on to our next slide. At this time, I'd like to give a huge thank you to you, Joel. I'd like to give a thank you to you, Keyshawn. I'd like to give a thank you to you, Monica. And of course, a huge thank you again to Mr. Christian Jacobs for being such a wealth of knowledge. And I want to thank you, the audience, for joining Into the Classroom, which is a production of Mental Health California. Please be sure to visit us at mentalhealthca.org. To access health and mental wellness topics for boys and men of color, please visit our signature initiative at brotherbewell.com, and be sure to subscribe to our blog. Also, I want to give a thank you to our sponsor, Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative, which promotes access to mental health support. You can learn about their program at bluesky.blueshieldca.com. With that, I'm your host, Conrad Crump. Until next time, take good care of yourselves. Thank you.